There is nothing better in footy than a comeback. And we've had a few big ones over the years, but there have been few better than that against Richmond at VFL Park in 1987.
And I think for the first game we got absolutely smashed by Sydney at Victoria Park by 15 goals. We had 11 or 12 first-time players at the club.
It was about round 4 in this particular game against the Tigers, my old side, but more importantly that we had, I think, off the back of an under-19 premiership for Collingwood, that a lot of these young guys were coming through. Guys like, Paul Rosonico, who only played a handful of games. I mean, it was very early for Michael Christian. Terry Keys had only played a couple of games, and even Gavin Brown had just started playing at this stage. So it was very early in the careers of all those guys. In this particular game against Richmond, we were without two of our stars in Tony Shaw and Peter Dacos as well. So it was going to be a very, very tough day for us. We weren't a great side at this stage.
Well, now back to the comeback, almost as big as the one that prompted the day that we celebrated yesterday, Easter Sunday.
We got absolutely belted in the first half, and I think early in the third quarter we might have been 51 points down, I think we were, at one stage in the third quarter. But that was all about kids. Kids have ability to perform inconsistently.
BT had a bit of a stinker in the first 2.5 quarters, and he was looking, the frustrated BT that he would sometimes get. And it was looking like that.
I don't think anyone in their own right could have thought from 39 points down with a really young team and without a couple of our stars in Shaw and Dacos that we could actually win the game.
So the problem is, when you walk into the rooms at half-time or three-quarter time and you say a long way behind, the problem is the players are down in the dumps. I was told once the coach should be the opposite of the rest of the world. So when everyone thinks they're hopeless, the coach has to try and build them up. That's what you're trying to get in terms, the resilience that if to keep playing the same way in a fashion. Take more risks when you're behind, yeah, but in a fashion it's trying to play with the same kind of enthusiasm and energy that you might play in the first 30 seconds of a game when the scores are completely equal.
Poole across there towards Waitman. Oh, straight into the lane, holding the ball. Play on Zakol.
When you're playing against your old side from a personal point of view, it's a great motivation. People underestimate, this is a side that Richmond perhaps didn't want me a couple of years earlier, and all of a sudden now I'm playing with Collingwood. So it's a great opportunity to show them what you could do. I hadn't touched the ball. In fact, I think I was the worst player on the ground in the first half. And to have the opportunity and get lucky towards the end and kick 6 goals was just, amazing, really.
Let's wait on it. No mistake. The Magpie fans roar. And we've got a game at VFL Park.
We made a push early in the last quarter and grabbed a couple back, but then Richmond got another one through Rioli, and I think 7 or 8 minutes in they were still 40 points up, and at that time the game's gone. The game's done and dusted. And then BT lit up, and this cast of others around him who didn't necessarily enjoy outstanding Collingwood careers all lifted. And we just came from nowhere, and the crowd went ballistic. And they talk about momentum swings in football. This was a belter.
Yeah, it was almost surreal because the goals just kept coming, and Richmond slowed to a walk, and yeah, it was incredible. Brian Taylor was the star. Had a pretty quiet first half from memory, and he fired up in the third quarter, got a bit angry and fired himself up, I reckon.
Goals came from everywhere, from unlikely sources. Matty Ryan kicked a couple of pearlers. Paul Rosonico, who didn't have a particularly long or a distinguished career here, kicked undoubtedly the goal of his career with a ball that seemed to follow him up his back and around the front, and he balked and turned and goaled from 50.
Paul Rosonico was a great character and should have played a lot more than he did. Had a few injuries and was in and out of the side a little bit, but that just showed how classy he was.
But there were heroics everywhere on that ground. I remember Matty Ryan up the other end when Richmond were surging, laying this crunching tackle that almost killed him and stopped an almost certain Richmond goal. And while they're carting him off looking in great distress, we managed to get the ball up the other end and score ourselves. That was a massive game changer in amongst this torrent of goals.
Western Australian. Craig Starcevich is off, goes Matt Ryan in a bad way.
Graham Atkins, who had a short career after being a high-profile recruit from North, kicked the one that put us in front with a ball that skyscrapered through the goals and made everybody wait for the goal umpire to rule.
There is one! North Melbourne recruit Graham Atkins puts his new side 4 points up.
It was just elation. You could see it in the end. Terry Keys, who was playing his first game that day, wearing number 60, had the ball at the siren and just booted it so far into the air. It was just sheer relief and exultation. So many of these guys were largely unknown at that point.
The euphoria post-match was on the ground was incredible, but in the rooms, and it was and you look at the fans as well as you're walking off, and I think that's one thing as a player that you always looked at, and the enjoyment that wins gave, you know, the fans, the dedicated fans. I think it was always, as a player, a great feeling that you could help them enjoy life for a week after a win, and that was certainly evident and came through on that day.
There were some great careers carved out of games like that, and I'm sure that left an indelible print in the mind of someone like Gavin Brown and Michael Christian, who later went on, a few years later, went on to be premiership players at the club. So it was a very important part of the building and getting the team together. I'm sure Leigh Matthews at the end of that game would have been very proud of the group to come from 51 points down at one stage in the third to get up and actually win the game.
There's the siren. The Magpies a miracle victory. They've won by 10 points after trailing by 39 at three-quarter time.